Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
There's just so much. It's, to me, it, as Henri Cartier-Bresson said, it captures a moment in time. And a lot of my work and what I'm interested in is culture or anthropology. I can't even speak properly. Anthropology. And that's the background of it, that I often think that when I'm walking around the streets, I see images. And I think that's how a photographer looks. And quite often I see images just in black and white. I don't see them in color. So as a black and white photographer, I'm looking more for form or shape or light. That gives the essence of what I'm looking at, that it evokes different things rather than if it was a color photograph or when you're seeing in color.
Right. Joe Farrell, welcome to the podcast. Today is a treat because usually it's done over Zoom, and today we're actually sitting across from each other.
6 feet apart.
Sure. Yeah, that's it. So I found, you gave me the address. I haven't been to this part of town. Well, I have been to Chai Wan before, but I didn't walk 15 minutes to find this really obscure part. The building is, what's the name of the building? I love these names.
Sunview Industrial.
Sunview Industrial, yeah. So come up here, and the most unbelievable space. I just love it. First of all, you come upstairs, an industrial building. You've got
industrial lifts.
Of course, industrial lifts. It's a large space, lots of concrete. But more importantly is that it's your studio. And so there's a lot of evidence of photography. Oh, a sound went away.
I just remembered that there was a sound we could eliminate.
Grazie mille. Okay. So as we dive in, typically we find out about the person and a little bit of their vision. And the idea is to inspire people who listen in about the possibilities of photography, just to hear about, because everybody kind of sees or responds or uses images in their own way. And you are somebody who's dedicated themselves as a photographer for a while. How about we talk about the first image which you sent me? And it's a...
I could also talk about Chai Wan, the area. Are you going? I assume you're going to.
We're just going to go.
Edit this.
Yeah.
You're
You're not going to edit. No, it's shooting it raw.
Oh my God! Oh, that's right, shooting it raw. I was just going to say, because I think it's an interesting fact that artists in Hong Kong, one of the big problems, especially now with COVID, is that the cost of space. And so I found my photography studio 8 years ago. And when I walked into this space, I immediately knew this was the one I wanted. And this area is full of artists, photographers, performance artists, musicians. And so probably the building you went before is that because the spaces are much cheaper, more reasonable to rent.
Right.
So if there's Hong Kong artists out there, it's something to look at. Is industrial spaces, not necessarily Chai Wan. There's Kwun Tong, Wan Shak Han, although that's now more expensive because the MTR is directly there.
Right.
This is slightly still out of the way, but I was sold on it, partially because of the views, the mountain views, and this studio has lots of windows and lots of light. So it's perfect to set up my photography, and I would, recommend.
Right. But before me, the reason why we met was because the person I had on the podcast just previously is Elizabeth. And after hearing her story and getting to know her, my response was, you are a rare bird in Hong Kong. Very rare. Somebody who's really dedicated herself to photography and the arts and images. And I see rare birds flock together because you are also this rare breed of person in Hong Kong. Like, So just to put the setting, okay, so we're seated at basically it's a work desk, a workbench. There's the recording material on the desk. You're seated in front of me. There's your computer tower on the left. There's it looks like sound equipment. I see big in the camera gear. It looks like a viewfinder camera gear.
Yeah, that's a 4x5 camera.
Yeah, I love 4x5. Behind you are prints or photographs framed on canvas, stretched. You've got your image, your glasses. You've got your dog crate. You've got a sofa, and you've got another huge stack of photographs. And then you've got like a big whiteboard marker space that's essentially maybe like 6 feet by 10 feet or something. And you have your notes for marketing and Kickstarter stuff. And there's just, I'm surrounded by cameras, and this is a studio. I love it. It smells like a studio. It looks like a studio.
Yeah, and I recently got this display cabinet, which was from AO Bookshop, which was closing their space. And I've been looking for one for ages because inside it is all my Bound Feet shoes.
I can see that
I've collected over the time. So I was very grateful that they were throwing it out because I've been looking for one to display. Part of it is also that because I do tours of Chai Wan art studios.
Oh, wow.
And I need to start them up again. That it's like a 3-hour tour going to 2 or 3 studios in small groups, and they can meet the artists, see their spaces, and it's really good to be able to show them the shoes that I have. Before I would have them on shelves and stuff, but it's perfect
segue, I must say, for the first image. Let me describe the image. You work in black and white. In this case, it's a black and white photograph.
It's all film. It's all analog.
So it's all film. Film into cameras. So the image is black and white, and it's got that delicious richness of film black and white. The subject matter is gnarly. Okay, so you use a Hasselblad for this one?
Yes.
Of course. The subject matter is gnarly, and so the image is of, well, it's hard to... Some people find feet hard to look at. You know, like, especially the older people get, the more their feet kind of get a little bit weathered and stuff. Because, you know, it's like hands. You can't... They show the wear and tear. So why don't you explain this image? Because it's full on.
Okay, so this image is of one of the women in my project. So to begin with, my project I've been doing for the last 16 years is photographing women with bound feet in China. There's none left in Hong Kong, but I go to Pacific areas in China and have interviewed them and photographed their feet and their homes and their daily life so that you get a glimpse into their world. This is of Sushi Rong, who was my translator's grandmother. So originally I had an exhibition in London 14 years ago, and I showed work from China, from Cuba, from Tibet, and one of my longtime friends, Zelda Cheetle, who's a art connoisseur professor, whatever. She's got multiple titles. She used to run the print room at the Photographers Gallery in London. And she's a great friend. And I said to her, what could I have done better? Give me some constructive criticism. And I really, truly believe that constructive criticism is extremely important for everybody to be able to move forward. And Zelda said to me, you should focus more. And I think it was a real wake-up call, and I thought, right, what I'm going to do is look at women's traditions, specifically bound feet, as I was living in Hong Kong. And so I went, and because I lived in Hong Kong, I asked various people in China and Hong Kong about bound feet, and everyone said no, there's no women left that have survived this, that they're too old. It was a tradition that started or was more prevalent in the Qing dynasty. And eventually somebody came to me and said, my grandmother has bound feet. So I went to China, did my first photography of bound feet. And the next year I went back and I couldn't find my translator. This is pre-smartphone. This is pre-social media, especially in China. So I lost my translator. So I was trying to find a new one. And the new one, when I explained the project to her, she said, my grandma has bound feet. And that is how I met Sushi Rong, who's the woman whose foot is in the photograph. On that day that I went to photograph, I went with her granddaughter, my translator, Blake, who was an English teacher at a local university, which is how I found her. And the most amazing thing about it was that at one point I've got photographs of Blake sitting on the bed, the kind of Chinese bed, both of them with bare feet. And I took these photos because they were amazing. And Blake said to me, and the family, the father and the sisters all said, you cannot use those photos. And I said, that's fine. You know, I don't have a model release from Blake. So I said, but why? Why do you not want me to use it? It's so natural. It's so beautiful that this woman who has bound feet, and this is her granddaughter without bound feet. And they said, because she will be ridiculed on social media. And I was like, by whom? And they said, by people. And I said, well, you know that there's nothing wrong with it. It's a girl sitting with her grandmother. And they were like, said, no, it's a huge problem. So I remember taking those photographs, so this specific photograph, and having this whole discussion about the next generation or the 2 generations later, thinking that having the photograph, the foot of the 22-year-old was more of a problem than photographing the bound feet foot. Okay. Which I thought was an interesting kind of juxtaposition, that it wasn't the bound feet that was the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when you tell me this, what I think about is saying, well, maybe there's the shame, for example, of the granddaughter having to go, and not that her feet are not bound, but then the shame of being caught in that situation of having, the grandmother's feet kind of publicized. It's funny to be having this conversation. Yes. Grandmother's feet publicized, but to have that kind of in the spotlight, more or less anonymously, and having this young girl who's 20 or whatever being connected to that, and maybe, I don't know, having a kind of a social pressure this way or that way.
No, I completely understand that. It was, I found it very interesting, the whole situation with all of the women. I photographed 50, 60 women.
In total? Wow.
And interviewed them all. And so I produced a book 4 years ago on 50 of the women that I had documented.
Is the book still in print?
Yes.
Give us a title.
The book is called Living History, Bound Feet Women of China. And it is a book that I put together myself. I actually did a Kickstarter for it and got twice the amount of money that I needed. But with Kickstarter, there are issues. You don't think about all the administration time, for one thing, and posting. So with these 50 women, one of the interesting things was that the people that actually didn't want to be photographed, it was more their children, their adult children, who were saying that, no, I don't agree with it. And I'm like, well, it's up to the woman herself. Because the majority of them were in their late 70s, going up to the oldest one was 102. And obviously in 2020, I was unable to go into China and see them and photograph. But I phoned them. I phoned everybody about 2 months ago and previously 6 months ago to check on them to see how they were doing. And I was actually told that Sushi Rong had passed away.
Okay.
So she has no longer. And not only that, so I would repeat it. The first time I met her, and that photograph was in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So I repeatedly went back and saw her. She was an incredible woman. She would always make these dumplings for me, which were fantastic. I mean, big trays of dumplings. Mm-hmm. The last time I saw her was in 2019, and it was a very poignant moment because when I first met her in 2008, the Chinese government were going to demolish her village.
Oh, wow.
Because they built a railway station at the end of her road. Mm. It took them 11 years for her to actually have to move out, mm-hmm. which was fortunate. And when I went there in 2019, it was 2 days before they had to move out.
Oh, wow.
And so it was, very typical in rural areas that they were moving them out to a high-rise. Mm-hmm. And that once they built high-rises in that area, they would be able to move back into them.
Right.
But obviously Su Shirong is unable to do that because she passed away. So on the day I saw her, I was with her son and her 2 daughters, and my translator and my driver. And we all sat there making dumplings mm-hmm. in silence.
Sure. And
I've got video of it because I did ask a couple of questions like, have you always lived in this house? And she said, yes, since she was married, of course, because mm-hmm. when traditionally in Chinese households that when you marry, you move to the man's village.
Yeah.
And so she had lived there for 70 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And all her children were born there, not
right.
in a hospital. So I was saying, to the children, so you were born here? And they were like, yeah. So it was just suddenly, it all was dawning on me and them and everything that this is it. Mm-hmm. This is the last time. And they were saying this is the last time we make dumplings. It was just quite incredible. Mm-hmm. So she was a huge part of my project. And, I've even I've got x-rays of her feet.
Right.
And I have some of her shoes, the wooden kind of husk ones sure. are her shoes.
Let me just again. So for the listener, what you see is the foot.
Sorry, I didn't describe the photo. I should go off into a story.
No, that's part of the format. Okay, yeah. So it's perfect. So the image is basically one foot facing the camera, and so the heel is it shows. It's basically this is an elder foot, I guess, and essentially to picture it, it's imagine if you took your hand and you made a fist, and then you smushed your fingers into this weird kind of so your hand looks like this weird kind of cone, odd thing where the big toe is sticking up on the top, and then the other toes or the other little piggies are kind of smushed together underneath. And when you look at it, you realize, oh, wait a second. Physiologically, the bones in there have all been really realigned and over time. So maybe explain, because you know this, give a quick explanation of how do human beings get their feet to look like this?
So there's many stories about this, and popular fiction will say that there was an auspicious day and they used goat's blood and all kinds of things. You have to remember the majority of the women that I documented or are still documenting are not from rich backgrounds. They are not the elite. They are farm workers. So to them, it was just a necessity that it had to be done. So the big toe does remain pointed outwards, and then they had long pieces of cotton that were wrapped around their toes and then towards the back of their heel and then forward again to wrap around the toes, actually bringing the toes and the heel closer together. So the metatarsals were actually pushed upwards, and it created a crevice between the heel and the bottom of the foot. So a lot of the distance, how the foot became so small, was because everything went upwards, was pushed upwards. So Chai Wan was actually known as one of the most beautiful women in her village because she had such perfectly formed bound feet. So she was top of the list for getting married. So even though it wasn't with, the rich, when the farm workers and laborers, that if they had bound feet, it was more likely they would marry somebody who also had more land, more sheep, rather than the dustman man kind of
got it.
thing. So they it was still a hierarchy depending on your feet. So yeah, this foot was taken on her bed, and it's with the Hasselblad, and it's I've got multiple photos in there of that shoot. You can see that, the toes seem broken, the 4 toes underneath and the big toe above. She had incredible feet. It was just amazing. I think you laugh. I know part of it. So
it's just, look, this is something that you've been thinking of, has been sort of saturating your subconscious, your conscious, your sight. For somebody who's not in it as much as you, who has as many connections and whatever, my reaction, which is...
I know your reaction, you said immediately gnarly. And it was very interesting because I was like, oh. And that was part of the process of how I work and why I do it. The first woman that I photographed, I said originally, was my driver's grandmother, the photographer of her over there.
Got it.
Zhang Yongying. And she had the most beautiful bound feet, the actual form of it. Within 1 hour of meeting her, she had taken off her shoes and socks and was showing me so that I could photograph, which is not my normal way. I like to get to know the people in my projects and before they start undressing. And so it was quite amazing. Because I went in there with preconceptions of what bound feet are, and especially as a woman thinking, this is so wrong, this is so bad, that how could they do that to a woman, a child, and came away from it. And now, 16 years later, completely on the other side and realizing it was actually more part of their culture, that how do we better ourselves? How do we get on? Which is very feminist.
Sure. Okay.
That it's kind of like, if I make myself more beautiful, then I'll have more.
Right.
And we do that in every society.
Sure.
And so it made me realize that, and to research and look at how women adorn themselves or modify themselves to be considered attractive, aesthetically pleasing.
Sure.
And so in Chinese culture, that was the thing.
Right.
So the first day when I met Zhang Yongying, I held her foot in my hand, and I've told this many times, it changed everything.
Sure.
Because I looked at it and it was like a sculpture.
Okay.
It was like, wow, what she actually did to achieve this, to attain this beauty that everybody wanted. And she did it. And everyone else turns around and says, that's disgusting, that's horrible. And so, well...
The one question that pops into mind is... how mobile are these women?
Oh, extremely.
So they can walk, right?
Oh, God, yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're actually pretty sprightly.
The feet or the people?
The people. They would... When I met Zhang Yongying originally, 2004, I found out that in her village, there was 3 other women with bound feet.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I remember them sitting around chatting, and then I'm like, hang on a minute. They've got bound feet as well. And then they said, no, we don't want to be part of the project.
Right.
So I said, fine. It's just, there isn't just one.
Sure.
There is more. And I produced another book, which is around here as well somewhere, which is just called Joe Farrell Photography 1. And in there, it has the photographs of the women sitting around chatting. And so I sent them each a copy. Mm. And then when I went back to see them the next year, they said, can we be in the next book?
Oh, that's nice.
So they then allowed me to photograph. And the other thing was that when I showed new women the photographs I'd taken so they could understand where I was coming from, that I wasn't trying to say this was a bad thing or laugh at them or anything, that they were fascinated by looking at how other people's feet were.
For sure.
Because they hadn't seen it.
Right.
Because part of it is Chinese culture and how they don't discuss it. It's considered such an old tradition that it doesn't reflect modern China, and they don't want it to appear out there.
Got it. I really appreciate and recognize and hear in how you speak your very strong feminist-driven perspective, and you touched on it in terms of which created a great segue to the next image, which was what and how do women do in order to, they get certain cards, they're dealt with a certain hand, and it's like, okay, well, what's the best you can make with what you've got? Why don't we talk about the next image? Because I don't know if that fits in that, direction. Yes. But
completely.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.